The briefing lasted exactly 14 minutes, which should have been David Reeves' first warning that this assignment would be nothing like the others. Colonel Hastings, a woman whose face seemed permanently arranged in an expression of bureaucratic exhaustion, slid a single photograph across the polished table. David picked it up, expecting the usual dossier material, threat assessments, psychological profiles, known associates. Instead, he found himself looking at what appeared to be a completely ordinary woman in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back, slight smile, wearing a simple gray sweater. Ordinary except for the ears. They swept back from her temples in graceful points, longer than any human ears, with a subtle curve that suggested both elegance and otherness. "Her name is Sira," Hastings said, her voice carrying the flat affect of someone who had explained this too many times already. "She arrived 3 weeks ago under the liaison protocol. You've heard of it, I assume." David had heard rumors. Everyone in the private security sector had. First contact had happened quietly, without the drama Earth science fiction had always promised. No invasion fleets, no ultimatums, no dramatic landing on the White House lawn. Just a signal, a conversation, and eventually an exchange program. They would send someone to live among us. We would send someone to live among them. Cultural bridges, the politicians called it. Hostages, the cynics muttered. "I'm familiar with the basics," David said, setting the photograph down. "What's the threat assessment?" Hastings almost smiled. "Almost. That's the interesting part. There isn't one. Not really. She's not in danger from her own people, they volunteered her. She's not in danger from our government, we have too much invested in making this work. But the general public," she waved a hand vaguely. "People are nervous, some are excited, some are angry. We had a protest outside her first housing location. Nothing violent, just signs and chanting, but it was enough to make everyone uncomfortable. So we moved her somewhere remote, and we're keeping her security detail small. Very small, just you." "Just me?" David leaned back in his chair. In 15 years of protection work, he'd never had a solo assignment for more than a few days. "What about rotations, backup?" "We'll have eyes on the perimeter remotely. But inside the safe house, it's just you two." She requested it, actually. Said having too many guards made her feel like a prisoner. Hastings pushed a tablet across the table. "Everything you need is in here. Medical information. And I should warn you, it's weird. Her biology is close enough to ours that she can eat our food and breathe our air, but different enough that you should read the emergency protocols carefully. Behavioral notes, communication preferences. The house is fully equipped. 6-month assignment starting tomorrow." David scrolled through the tablet, his trained eye catching details. Sira could see slightly into the infrared spectrum. Her hearing range extended beyond human capabilities. She had something called bioelectric sensitivity that nobody on the briefing team seemed able to explain adequately. "It says here she can sense electromagnetic fields." "What does that mean practically?" "It means she knows when you're lying, apparently. Their species evolved it as a social tool. They can read the tiny electrical impulses in nervous systems, interpret emotional states with creepy accuracy." Hastings stood, clearly ready to end the meeting. "My advice? Don't lie to her. Also, she thinks our coffee tastes terrible but drinks it anyway out of what I can only assume is diplomatic stubbornness. She has a sense of humor about the whole situation, which frankly makes her more emotionally stable than most of my staff." Questions. David had about 100, but he knew the type of questions Hastings would actually answer numbered closer to 0. "When do I start?" "Your gear is already at the location. The house is 40 minutes outside Olympia, forest on 3 sides, ocean view from the back. Private road, good sight lines. You'll like it. Sira arrives at 1400 hours tomorrow. Try not to make her feel like a specimen in a zoo. Apparently, the last security team had a habit of staring." Hastings gathered her files. "Oh, and Reeves. This assignment is unprecedented. There's no playbook. Use your judgment. Just remember that how this goes might determine whether humanity gets a second date with the rest of the galaxy. No pressure then. The safe house turned out to be less of a house and more of an architectural fever dream. All windows and angles, built to capture light and views while somehow maintaining defendable positions. David spent his first evening there checking sight lines and emergency exits, memorizing the security system, and trying to convince himself this was just another job. The refrigerator had been stocked with an odd mixture of human food and sealed containers labeled in a flowing script he couldn't read. A bookshelf held volumes in English and what he assumed was Sira's language. A sound system looked far too sophisticated for simple music playback. He slept poorly that night in the small bedroom designated as his, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant rhythm of waves, thinking about those elongated ears in the photograph, and wondering what it would be like to be the only one of your kind on an entire planet. At precisely 1400 hours, a black vehicle with heavily tinted windows pulled up the private road. David watched from the doorway, his posture professionally neutral, as two liaison protocol escorts emerged first, followed by Sira herself. The photograph hadn't captured it. The way she moved, the way she paused at the edge of the driveway to look up at the towering Douglas firs with something like wonder. She wore simple clothes, dark pants, a blue jacket, but carried herself with a grace that seemed almost choreographed. Then she turned toward the house, toward David, and smiled with what looked like genuine relief. "You must be David," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place, something in the cadence rather than the pronunciation. "Please tell me you're not going to stand in doorways looking intimidating for the entire 6 months. I'd like to think we can be friendlier than that." One of the escorts cleared his throat. "Ms. Sira, we need to complete the security briefing." "I've had 9 security briefings," Sira said, still looking at David. "I promise I know not to answer the door to strangers or post our location on social media." "David looks competent. I trust him already." She tilted her head slightly, those remarkable ears catching the afternoon light. "I can feel that you're nervous, David. Your bioelectric field is very jumpy. Are you nervous about me, or nervous about the job?" The escorts exchanged glances. David felt something shift in his chest, surprise maybe, or the first hint of a challenge. "Yes," he said. Sira laughed, a sound like water over stones. "An honest answer. I like you already. Shall we?" 3 weeks had passed since Sira arrived, and David had learned that protecting an extraterrestrial diplomat involved far more questions about human behavior than he'd anticipated. She asked about everything. Why did humans shake hands instead of bowing? What was the evolutionary purpose of eyebrows? Why did his coffee maker sound angry every morning? He tried explaining that it was just the brewing mechanism, but she remained convinced the machine harbored a grudge. "It's definitely angry," she said one morning, standing at a careful distance from the burbling appliance. "I can feel the electromagnetic hostility." "That's just the heating element," David said, pouring himself a cup. "Your heating element has contempt for its existence." She accepted the cup he offered her, took a sip, and grimaced exactly the way she had every morning for 3 weeks. "This still tastes like punishment." "You don't have to drink it." "But you do, so I should understand why." She took another determined sip, her face contorting. "My people have a saying, to know someone, taste what they taste, although I'm starting to think your entire species might be suffering from collective sensory damage." David almost smiled. Almost. He'd been carefully rationing those, keeping his responses professional, his distance measured. But Sira made it difficult. She'd spent the first week treating the safe house like a museum, examining every object with scientific fascination. The television remote had occupied an entire afternoon. She'd held it up to the light, pressed every button methodically, and announced that human interface design was charmingly optimistic about user intelligence. Now she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by books. She developed a habit of reading 3 or 4 simultaneously, claiming her brain processed information differently than humans. David believed it. He'd watched her eyes move across pages in patterns that seemed random, until he realized she was reading in a spiral, pulling meaning from the text, in a way that defied linear logic. David, why do humans write so many stories about being alone? She held up 2 books, one a post-apocalyptic novel, another about a castaway. You're a social species. Your biology requires connection. Yet your fiction obsesses over isolation. He checked the perimeter display on his tablet, a habit every 30 minutes. All clear. Maybe we write about it because we fear it. Do you fear it? Those large eyes fixed on him, and he felt that odd sensation he'd grown accustomed to, like she was reading something just beneath his skin. I'm working, he said, which wasn't an answer. You're always working. She set the books aside and stood, moving to the window. The afternoon light caught her profile, and David found himself noticing details he'd tried not to notice. The way her ears moved slightly when she concentrated, the bioluminescent patterns that occasionally flickered across her irises when she felt strong emotions. She'd explained once that her people communicated partly through these patterns, a visual language humans couldn't reproduce. On my world, what you do would be called Kethir. It means someone who stands between danger and those they protect. It's considered one of the most intimate relationships possible. It's just a job. She turned, and something in her expression suggested she could taste the lie in his bioelectric field. Is it? You haven't left this house in 3 weeks except to check the perimeter. You sleep 4 hours a night. You eat standing up. You watch me like I might disappear if you blink. She moved closer, and David felt his pulse quicken despite his training. That's not just a job, David, that's something else. The tablet in his hand chimed, a delivery drone approaching with supplies. David seized the interruption gratefully. Groceries, I'll check them. Running away, her voice held amusement, doing my job. He stepped outside, breathing the cool forest air, trying to reset himself. The drone descended with its usual mechanical precision, depositing 3 containers on the designated platform before ascending again. David scanned each container, no tampering, seals intact. One held human food, one held the specialized nutrition Sira required, and the third contained medical supplies. He carried them inside to find Sira attempting to cook. No, he said immediately, setting the containers down. Absolutely not. I watched a tutorial, she protested, gesturing at the tablet propped on the counter. A cheerful human chef smiled from the screen, explaining something about sautéing. It seemed straightforward. Last time you tried cooking, you nearly burned down the kitchen. That was a learning experience. She held up a knife with obvious unfamiliarity. This time I'll be more careful with the heat application. David took the knife gently from her hand. How about I cook and you observe? Hands-on learning but with less fire. She laughed that water-over-stone sound. You're very protective, David, not just of my physical safety. You protect me from embarrassment, from difficulty, from small failures. Why? He began unpacking vegetables, grateful for something to do with his hands. It's efficient. It's kind. She moved to sit on the counter watching him work. Your species is strange about kindness. You do it constantly but pretend you don't. You'll cross a street to help a stranger but claim you were just walking that direction anyway. You'll sit with someone in pain and say you had nothing better to do. Her head tilted. Why do humans hide their gentleness like it's shameful? Maybe we've learned it's safer that way. The words emerged before he could stop them, more honest than he'd intended. Sira's eyes flickered with those bioluminescent patterns, sympathy, if he was reading them correctly. Safer from what? Complications. He focused on chopping an onion with unnecessary precision. In my line of work, you maintain boundaries. Getting personally involved compromises your judgment. You become protective for the wrong reasons. You hesitate when you shouldn't or don't hesitate when you should. People get hurt. Has someone been hurt? Because of you. The question hung in the air between them. David set down the knife, gripping the counter edge. 5 years ago. Different assignment. I let myself care about the client, made a decision based on emotion instead of protocol. She lived, but barely. I decided after that to keep things professional. And has that worked? Sierra's voice was gentle. Being professional. He looked at her then, really looked, and found her watching him with something that felt like understanding. It worked fine until 3 weeks ago. The admission sat between them, honest and dangerous. Sierra smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. On my world, we believe connection is inevitable. You can't spend days and nights in someone's presence, sharing space and breath and time without forming bonds. Fighting it just makes you tired. She slid down from the counter. But I understand. Your job is to protect me. My job is to be worth protecting. Perhaps we should both focus on that and stop asking uncomfortable questions. She left the kitchen, and David stood alone with half-chopped vegetables, feeling like he'd won and lost something simultaneously. The evening passed quietly. Sierra read while David monitored communications and security feeds. They ate dinner with careful politeness, discussing safe topics, the weather, her language lessons, the migratory patterns of local birds she'd been observing. Later, as David made his final perimeter check before taking first watch, he found Sierra standing at the large window overlooking the ocean. The moon reflected off the water in silver fragments. 3 moons, she said softly. My world has 3 moons. The tides are different. The nights are never this dark. She pressed her palm against the glass. I volunteered for this mission because I wanted to understand you. Humans, I mean. Your art, your chaos, your beautiful broken way of connecting with each other. But I didn't expect it to be so lonely. David moved to stand beside her, maintaining professional distance. You can call home whenever you want. The communication array. I know I do call, but it's not the same. She glanced at him, her expression vulnerable in the moonlight. My people don't sleep alone, David. We rest in groups, in families, listening to each other's life rhythms. Here, I lie in the dark and hear only silence and my own heartbeat. I'm trying to adapt, but some evolutionary needs don't bend easily. Something in David's chest tightened. The briefing materials didn't mention that. I didn't want to seem weak. I'm supposed to be a bridge between worlds, and I can't even handle sleeping by myself. She laughed, but it lacked her usual warmth. Pathetic, isn't it? No, David said quietly. It's honest. They stood together in silence, watching the moon paint patterns on the ocean, both pretending distance was still possible between 2 people who'd spent 3 weeks learning each other's rhythms, fears, and small kindnesses. David told himself this was still just an assignment. Sierra told herself she was just homesick. Neither of them was particularly convincing, even to themselves. The storm arrived on a Tuesday with the kind of meteorological violence that made David check the structural integrity reports twice. Wind rattled the windows like an impatient visitor, and rain came in sheets so thick the ocean disappeared behind a gray wall. The power went out at 3 in the afternoon, along with the satellite uplink, leaving them isolated in a way that made David's training scream warnings his rational mind tried to ignore. This is exciting, Sierra said, peering out at the chaos with genuine enthusiasm. On my world, storms are controlled by atmospheric regulators. I've never experienced whether that just happens. Exciting isn't the word I'd use. David switched to backup power for essential systems only, perimeter sensors, emergency communications, medical equipment. The rest of the house fell into gloom punctuated by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of amber. We'll be fine. The house is rated for conditions far worse than this. You say that, but your bioelectric field suggests you're mentally reviewing every possible disaster scenario. She moved away from the window as lightning split the sky. How many scenarios are there? 17 currently. Only 17. I'd expect more from you. She settled onto the couch, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. The temperature had already begun dropping with the heating system offline. Tell me the most ridiculous one. David ran diagnostics on the backup generator. The most ridiculous disaster scenario. Yes, I want to know the absolute worst thing your mind has invented that could happen during a storm. He glanced at her, found her watching him with that expression she got when she was trying to distract him from stress. A tree falls on the house, damages the structure, and simultaneously a black bear breaks through the compromised wall seeking shelter. Sierra blinked. That's oddly specific. It happened on an assignment in Montana. Did you fight the bear? I gave the bear the bedroom and we stayed in the living room until morning. The client thought it was hilarious. David checked the perimeter sensors, grateful they were still functioning. The bear was less impressed with the situation than she was. I like that story. Sierra pulled the blanket tighter. It makes you seem less invincible, more like someone who occasionally negotiates with wildlife. Thunder rolled overhead and David saw her flinch slightly. How long do these storms typically last? This one is supposed to blow through by morning. He moved through the house, checking windows and doors, his mind automatically cataloging vulnerabilities. Try to get some rest. I'll monitor everything. David, it's barely evening. Rest is strategic. You never know when you'll need reserves. He settled into his chair near the main security console, tablet balanced on his knee, falling into the familiar rhythm of vigilance. Sierra watched him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Do you ever stop? Stop what? Being on guard, being the wall between the world and whatever you're protecting. She stood, letting the blanket fall. Even now, when we're completely safe, when the only danger is weather that can't reach us, you sit there like you're expecting an invasion. It's my job. It's your armor. She moved closer and David forced himself not to retreat. You wear it so constantly, I wonder if you remember what you feel like without it. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face in stark white, and David saw something in her eyes that made his careful professional distance feel suddenly insufficient. Sierra, I can't do this anymore. Her voice was quiet but firm. I can't keep pretending I sleep well, that I'm adjusting, that being alone every night isn't slowly breaking something in me. She wrapped her arms around herself. My people have a word, Karish. It means the erosion that happens when you deny your nature too long. I'm experiencing Karish, David. I'm being worn away by isolation. You call home every day. You have communications. It's not the same. A voice through technology isn't presence. It isn't breath and heartbeat and the small sounds that tell you you're not alone in the dark. She turned away, moving back to the window. I'm sorry. I know this isn't your problem. You didn't sign up to be my emotional support. You're here to keep me physically safe, and you do that perfectly. David set down his tablet, something in her voice pulling him to his feet despite his better judgment. It is my problem if it affects your well-being. That's part of the job. She laughed, but it was hollow. Of course, the job, always the job. Rain hammered against the glass. Do you know what I miss most? Not my family, not my home, not even my world's 3 moons. I miss sleeping in the communal rest spaces, where you can hear 30 people breathing around you. Different rhythms, different patterns, all weaving together into this symphony of life. Here, I lie awake listening to nothing but my own pulse and wondering if I'm disappearing. The vulnerability in her admission struck something in David's chest. You're not disappearing. How would you know? You keep yourself so distant I'm not sure you even see me as real. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. I'm just another assignment, just another problem to solve. That's not true. Then what am I? She turned and her eyes held a challenge. Tell me honestly. Use that voice you save for actual truth instead of professional courtesy. What am I to you? The question hung between them while the storm raged outside, and David felt every carefully constructed boundary he'd built over 3 weeks begin to crack. You're someone who makes terrible coffee taste worth drinking, because watching you grimace is the best part of my morning. You're someone who reads in spirals and sees patterns I'll never understand. You're someone whose laugh sounds like every good thing I didn't know I was missing. The words came faster now, pressure releasing. You're someone I think about constantly when I should be thinking about protocols and threat assessments. You're someone who makes me forget why I decided distance was safer in the first place. Sierra's eyes flickered with those bioluminescent patterns, rapid and intense. Your bioelectric field is chaotic. You're terrified and relieved simultaneously. That's accurate. David ran a hand through his hair. This is exactly what I said I wouldn't do. Getting personally involved, compromising my judgment, caring for the wrong reasons. What are the right reasons? Professional obligation, contract fulfillment, duty. Those sound lonely. She moved closer and David didn't retreat. On my world, we believe caring is never the wrong reason. It's the only reason that matters. Thunder shook the house, and suddenly Sierra was there, closer than professional distance allowed, close enough that David could see the intricate patterns in her irises shifting like living art. I'm scared, she said quietly. Not of the storm, of how much I want you to stop standing guard at my door and just be here, really here, with me. David's training screamed at him to step back, to restore boundaries, to remember every reason this was dangerous. But his heart, his stubborn human heart that he'd tried so hard to armor, whispered different advice. I'm scared too. Of what? That if I stop being your guard, I won't know how to be anything else. That I'll fail you in ways that matter more than physical protection. That I've spent so long being professional I've forgotten how to be human. He met her eyes. That I'll hurt you somehow, and I won't be able to forgive myself. Sierra reached up, her fingers hovering near his face without touching. May I? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Her fingertips pressed gently against his temples, and suddenly he felt it, that bioelectric sense she described. Not reading his thoughts but feeling the electrical patterns of his emotions, the rapid-fire symphony of his nervous system. Fear and longing and determination and surrender all mixed together. Oh, she breathed. You feel so loud, so alive. How do you contain all of this? Practice, his voice was rough, years of practice. Stop practicing. Her hand slid down to rest against his chest over his heart, just for tonight. The storm will pass, and tomorrow we can go back to pretending distance is possible. But right now, I need to not be alone. And I think you need that too. Lightning illuminated them both. Two beings from different worlds standing in a dark house, while weather tried to tear the sky apart. David felt something in him surrender, some final defense giving way. I don't know how to do this halfway. Then don't. Sierra's smile was gentle. Come sit with me, talk to me. Let me hear your heartbeat, that's all. Just be present instead of vigilant. David looked at the security console, at his tablet with its feeds and alerts, at all the tools of professional distance. Then he looked at Sierra, at the hope and loneliness in her expression, and made a choice that terrified him. Okay. They moved to the couch, and David sat with her in the amber emergency lighting while the storm raged. Sierra curled against his side, her ear pressed over his heart, and released a breath that sounded like relief. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being human, for being scared, for being here. She settled deeper against him. Your heartbeat is different than I expected, steadier. What did you expect? Something more frantic. But this is calm, strong like you. Her eyes began to close. This is what I've been missing, not just presence but willing presence, someone who chooses to be here. David let his hand rest carefully on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her through the fabric. Outside, the storm continued its violence, but inside, something had shifted irreversibly. He'd crossed a line he'd sworn not to cross, and the terrifying part was how right it felt. The morning after the storm arrived with aggressive cheerfulness, sunlight pouring through windows, birds celebrating survival, the whole forest glittering with residual rain. David woke on the couch with a crick in his neck and Sierra still curled against him, her breathing deep and even. He'd meant to return to his post once she fell asleep. He'd fully intended to restore professional boundaries. Instead, he'd stayed exactly where he was for 7 hours, which represented either a catastrophic failure of discipline or the best sleep he'd had in 5 years. Possibly both. Sierra stirred, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she looked disoriented, then awareness returned, and she smiled with such unguarded warmth that David felt something in his chest twist. "Good morning." "Morning," his voice came out rougher than intended. "How did you sleep?" "Like I haven't slept since arriving on your planet." She sat up, stretching in a way that involved more joints than human anatomy allowed. "Your heartbeat is very soothing, like a metronome for existence. I might have become addicted to it." "That's not ominous at all." She laughed, standing and moving to the window. "The storm did impressive work. There's a tree branch on the deck that wasn't there yesterday. No bears, though. I'm almost disappointed." David checked his tablet, relieved to find communications restored and all systems functional. No alerts, no breaches, nothing requiring immediate attention, which left him alone with the implications of what had happened. "About last night. Are you going to tell me it was a mistake?" Sierra turned from the window, her expression knowing that we should forget it happened and return to professional distance. "I should tell you that. But you're not going to, because you're a terrible liar and I can read your bioelectric field like a children's book." She moved to the kitchen, began the morning ritual of making coffee with exaggerated caution. "David, I'm not asking you to abandon your responsibilities. I'm just asking you to stop pretending we're strangers who happen to occupy the same space. We've moved beyond that, whether you're comfortable with it or not." The coffee maker gurgled to life and Sierra glared at it. Still angry, this machine has serious unresolved issues. "It's a coffee maker. It's a coffee maker with attitude." She poured 2 cups, handed him one. "On my world, we have a concept called thuras, the acknowledgement of inevitable connection. When 2 people spend enough time in genuine proximity, they become threaded together. Fighting it doesn't prevent it, just makes both people exhausted." She took a sip, grimaced magnificently. "Like continuing to drink this horrible beverage. I'm threaded to it now. Resistance is futile." David found himself almost smiling despite the anxiety churning in his gut. "You're comparing our situation to bad coffee. I'm comparing your stubbornness to my stubbornness about coffee. Both involve consuming something bitter while pretending it's fine." She set down her cup. "The difference is I'm willing to admit the coffee is terrible, and I drink it anyway because it matters to me. You won't admit that what's happening between us matters." "It matters." The admission came easier than he expected. "That's the problem." "Why is mattering a problem?" "Because mattering compromises judgment, makes you hesitate or act rashly, gets people hurt." He stared into his coffee like it held answers. 5 years ago, I cared about a client, really cared, made a decision based on wanting to protect her from disappointment instead of following protocol. She nearly died because I prioritized her feelings over her safety." Sierra sat down across from him, her expression serious. "What happened?" "She wanted to attend her daughter's wedding. It wasn't on the approved schedule, the venue hadn't been secured properly, but she was heartbroken about missing it. I made a judgment call, decided the threat assessment was low enough to allow it." David's hands tightened around the cup. "I was wrong. Someone had been watching, waiting for exactly that kind of deviation from protocol. She took 2 bullets meant for her daughter, survived barely, spent 3 months in recovery. And you've been punishing yourself ever since by never caring about anyone." Sierra's voice was gentle. "That's not protection, David. That's just a different kind of isolation. It keeps people safe." "Does it? Or does it just keep you safe from feeling anything?" She reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of his hand. "I'm not asking you to be reckless. I'm asking you to acknowledge that caring about me doesn't automatically mean you'll fail at protecting me. Maybe it means you'll do it better because the stakes are real. Before David could respond, his tablet chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at it and felt his stomach drop. "We have a visitor. Liaison Protocol Supervisor conducting a surprise inspection. Arriving in 30 minutes. Wonderful." Sierra stood, suddenly all business. "Should I pretend you weren't sleeping on the couch with me, or have they upgraded to monitoring our emotional states remotely?" "They don't monitor emotional states." "Pity, that would save so much awkward conversation." She headed toward her room. "I'll make myself presentable. Try to look professional and not like someone who just discovered feelings for the first time in half a decade." "I don't look like that." "David, you look exactly like that." She paused in the doorway. "It's actually quite endearing, very human. Your species does emotional panic beautifully." The supervisor arrived precisely on time, which David expected, and turned out to be Hastings herself, which he didn't. She swept into the house with her characteristic bureaucratic efficiency, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. "Reeves, how's our bridge between worlds?" "Adjusting well. No incidents, no threats, all protocols maintained." The lies came automatically, smooth and professional. "Excellent. Where is she?" Sierra emerged from her room looking composed and diplomatic, every inch the cultural ambassador. "Colonel Hastings, what a pleasant surprise." "Ms. Sierra, just a routine check, making sure you have everything you need." Hastings began walking through the house, making notes. "Any issues with the security arrangements? Problems with your guard?" "None whatsoever. David is extraordinarily competent." Sierra's voice held just the right amount of formal appreciation. "I feel very safe." "Good, we've had some concerning intelligence recently." Hastings stopped at the window overlooking the ocean. "There's a group calling themselves Humanity, first gaining traction online. Anti-integration extremists. They see your presence here as the beginning of some kind of invasion or cultural contamination. Mostly harmless, but their rhetoric is escalating." David felt his protective instincts sharpen immediately. "Specific threats. Nothing actionable yet, but we're increasing monitoring. I need you to be extra vigilant, Reeves. No deviations from protocol, no unauthorized movement, nothing that could create vulnerability." Hastings turned to Sierra. "I know this is restrictive, but your safety is paramount. Not just for your sake, but for what you represent." "I understand." Sierra's expression remained calm, but David could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "I'll follow whatever guidelines you establish." The storm last night didn't cause any issues. Hastings glanced between them, and David wondered if she could sense the changed dynamic. "Just some debris on the deck, nothing structural." He kept his voice level, professional. "Power was out for several hours, but backup systems functioned perfectly." "And you maintained security protocols throughout?" "Absolutely." Hastings studied him for a moment longer than comfortable, then nodded. "Good. I'll file a positive report. Continue as you are." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Reeves, a word outside." David followed her onto the deck, his mind racing through possible discoveries. Hastings waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "How are you really doing?" "Fine, everything's under control." "That's what concerns me." She turned to face him fully. "I've read your file. I know about the incident 5 years ago. I know why you requested solo assignments after that. I'm asking you, professionally, if this situation is sustainable." "I'm doing my job." "Are you?" "Because sustainable protection requires emotional stability. If you're white-knuckling it through every day, eventually you'll make a mistake." Her voice softened slightly. "She's easy to care about, Reeves. Intelligent, kind, genuinely interested in understanding us. I'm not blind to that. I'm just asking if you can maintain the necessary distance." David thought about last night, about Sierra sleeping against his chest, about the lines he'd already crossed. "I can do my job." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer I have." Hastings sighed. "Fair enough. Just remember, she's not just a client, she's a symbol. If something happens to her because of emotional compromise, it doesn't just affect you. It affects humanity's entire relationship with our species. The weight of that should keep you focused. She left shortly after, her vehicle disappearing down the private road. David stood on the deck watching until it vanished, feeling the weight she'd mentioned settling heavily across his shoulders. She knows. Sierra appeared beside him. Not the details, but she suspects something has changed. Probably. Are you going to let that scare you back into distance? She leaned against the railing. Because if so, I should prepare myself now. Save us both the awkwardness. David looked at her, at the sunlight catching in her hair, at those remarkable ears that marked her as other and the eyes that saw through every defense he tried to build. I don't know how to do this. Be close to you and keep you safe simultaneously. Then learn, she smiled. You're intelligent and adaptable. Apply those skills to something besides threat assessment. She pushed away from the railing. I'm going to attempt cooking again. You can supervise to prevent disasters, which is essentially protection detail with more vegetables. See, we can combine both things. The last time you cooked was a valuable learning experience about heat application. This time will be different. She headed inside, and David followed despite his better judgment, watching her navigate the kitchen with determined incompetence while trying not to think about how normal this felt, how right, how terrifyingly important she'd become in just a few weeks. The day passed in careful negotiation between what they were and what they were becoming. Professional and personal, guard and something warmer, duty and desire, all tangled together in ways David couldn't separate anymore. By evening he'd stopped trying. 2 months had passed since the storm, and David had stopped pretending distance was possible. They'd settled into something that defied easy categorization. He still did his job with meticulous precision, still checked perimeters and monitored threats, still maintained the protocols that kept Sierra safe. But now he also sat with her in the evenings, listened to her read passages from books in her flowing language, learned to recognize the bioluminescent patterns that flickered across her eyes when she was amused or thoughtful, or, increasingly, when she looked at him. The coffee maker had finally broken, which Sierra declared a victory for appliances everywhere. It died doing what it loved, being hostile to its users, she'd said solemnly while David ordered a replacement. She still drank the terrible coffee every morning, still grimaced magnificently, and David had stopped questioning why that small ritual had become the best part of his day. They were sitting on the deck in the late afternoon, Sierra attempting to teach him about quantum resonance patterns while he pretended to understand, when his tablet erupted with alerts. David was on his feet immediately, threat assessment flooding his mind, but the message that appeared made him freeze. What is it? Sierra stood, reading his bioelectric field in that uncanny way. You're scared. Actually scared, not professionally concerned. Communication from your home world. Priority channel. He pulled up the holographic display, and suddenly the air above his tablet shimmered with three-dimensional text in Sierra's language alongside a human translation. Her face went pale. They want me to come home, now, immediately. Her voice was hollow. There's been a political shift. The faction that opposed integration has gained power. They're recalling all cultural ambassadors, ending the exchange program. David felt something crack in his chest. When? 72 hours. They're sending a retrieval ship. She sank back into her chair, staring at the message like it might change if she looked hard enough. It's over, all of it. The mission, the cultural bridge, everything we were trying to build between our worlds. What happens if you refuse? I become a political exile. My family faces consequences. The fragile peace between our species becomes even more fragile. She looked at him, and her eyes held a devastation that made his training scream useless advice about maintaining professional boundaries. I have to go, David. I don't have a choice. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm. Birds sang oblivious songs, and the world kept turning despite the fact that David's carefully reconstructed life was collapsing. He'd known this was temporary. He'd known she would leave eventually. He just convinced himself he'd have more time to prepare, to armor himself against the inevitable loss. "Well," he said finally, his voice surprisingly steady, "we have 72 hours. We should make them count." Sierra laughed, but it was edged with tears. "You're being very calm about this." "I'm not calm. My bioelectric field must be chaos right now. It's a symphony of panic and determination and something else I don't have a word for in your language." She stood, moved to the railing. "On my world, we have a tradition. When something ends, we celebrate what it was rather than mourning what it won't be. We call it Thelas, the honoring of finite things. Your people have a word for everything. We're a very emotionally verbose species." She turned to face him. "I want to spend these 72 hours not preparing to leave but being fully here. With you. No more half measures, no more careful distance. Just honest presence before it becomes impossible." David knew this was inadvisable on approximately 17 different levels. He also knew he was going to do it anyway. Okay. They spent the next 3 days in a kind of suspended reality, where time felt both infinite and desperately scarce. Sierra taught him phrases in her language, most of which he butchered spectacularly. He taught her to cook actual edible food, which she approached with the same scientific fascination she brought to everything. They stayed up late talking about impossible things, what it meant to bridge worlds, whether love was universal or culturally constructed, how two beings from different species had managed to become so thoroughly tangled in each other's existence. "I don't understand human crying," Sierra said on the second night, watching David try not to do exactly that. "Your species releases salt water from your eyes when experiencing strong emotions. It seems physiologically inefficient." "It's not meant to be efficient. It's meant to be cathartic." "Is it working?" "Not particularly." He wiped his eyes roughly. "I spent 5 years avoiding this exact feeling. Caring about someone so much that losing them hurts. I did everything right this time. Maintained protocols, stayed vigilant, kept you safe. And it doesn't matter because you're leaving anyway." Sierra moved closer, her fingers finding his temples in that gesture he'd grown to anticipate. "Feel what I'm feeling," she said softly, and suddenly David was awash in her bioelectric patterns, grief and gratitude and something that felt like his own emotions reflected back at him, amplified and undeniable. "You didn't fail at protecting me. You succeeded completely. I'm alive, I'm safe, and I got to experience something I never expected to find on this world. That's not a failure, David. That's everything working exactly right, even though it hurts. I don't want you to go. I know, I don't want to go either, but we don't get to choose that." She pressed her forehead against his. "We only get to choose how we spend the time we have." On the final morning, David woke to find Sierra already up, standing at the window watching the sky. The retrieval ship would arrive in a few hours, visible only to specialized equipment until it descended for extraction. She'd packed nothing, claimed she wanted to leave everything behind, start fresh with only memories. "I made coffee," she said without turning. "It's terrible. I'm going to miss it desperately." David joined her, accepted the cup she offered. "I'm going to miss watching you hate it." "David, I need to tell you something before I lose my nerve." She set down her cup, faced him fully. "On my world, we have something called charis, a bond that forms when two beings synchronize so completely they become part of each other's life rhythm. It's rare, especially between different species, but I feel it with you, have felt it since the storm, maybe before. Your heartbeat has become as familiar to me as my own." "I feel it too." The admission came easily now after 3 days of practiced honesty. "I don't know what to call it in human terms. Love seems too simple. Connection seems too clinical, but whatever it is, it's real." "Then let me give you something." She took his hand, pressed it flat against her chest over her heart. "Feel this rhythm. Learn it. Carry it with you. On my world, we believe that charis doesn't end with distance. Once two beings synchronize, they remain threaded across any space." Her eyes flickered with those luminescent patterns, rapid and intense. I'll carry your heartbeat with me, across the stars, across the distance. It will remind me that I was briefly, impossibly, connected to someone who taught me what it means to be seen. The retrieval ship arrived precisely on schedule, a shimmer in the sky that resolved into elegant alien geometry. Liaison protocol agents arrived to facilitate the extraction, Hastings among them. She took one look at David and Sierra standing close together on the deck and said nothing, which somehow said everything. "You did good work, Reeves," she said quietly while Sierra gathered her few personal items. "Against all odds, you kept her safe and made her feel human. That's what she needed." "I didn't make her feel human. I just stopped treating her like an assignment." Same thing in this case. Hastings glanced at Sierra, then back at David. "For what it's worth, the official report will reflect that you maintained perfect professional standards throughout. What you do with the unofficial truth is your business." The extraction took 15 minutes. Efficient, clinical, exactly the kind of departure David had facilitated dozens of times in his career. Except this time he was on the wrong side of it, watching someone who mattered disappear into a ship that would carry her light years away. Sierra paused at the threshold, turned back. "David, last thing. Stop being so afraid of caring about the people you protect. The incident 5 years ago, you made a choice based on compassion. It went wrong, but that doesn't mean the compassion was the problem. Sometimes caring and protecting are the same thing." She smiled, and it was devastating. "You protected me perfectly, not despite caring but because of it." Then she was gone, the ship rising silently into the afternoon sky until it vanished like a dream interrupted. David stood alone on the deck for a long time after, feeling the absence where her presence had been. The house felt cavernous and silent without her curiosity filling it, without her terrible coffee-making attempts, without her reading in spirals or asking questions that unraveled his carefully constructed defenses. His tablet chimed with a new assignment, another client, another location, another chance to maintain professional distance. David looked at it for a long moment, then pulled up his personal communications. He recorded a brief message to the therapist he'd stopped seeing 5 years ago, asking to restart sessions. Then he called Hastings. "I need some time before the next assignment. Personal leave, 2 weeks. Everything okay, Reeves?" "No, but it will be." He looked at the ocean, at the sky where Sierra had disappeared. "I need to figure some things out, about how to do this job without cutting myself off from being human." "Take a month," Hastings said. "You've earned it, and Reeves, she left something for you. Check your secure messages." The message was audio only, Sierra's voice warm and slightly amused. "David, I'm recording this before leaving because I know you'll spend the next several weeks being professionally stoic about everything. Stop it. You're allowed to miss me. You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to acknowledge that something real happened between us, even if it was temporary. On my world, we believe finite things can still be meaningful, sometimes more meaningful because they're finite. You taught me what it means to be protected by someone who sees you as more than a problem to solve. I'll carry that forever. Carry me too, in whatever way works for you. And the next time you drink terrible coffee, think of me." David played the message 3 times, then saved it carefully in a file labeled simply Sierra. He made coffee, grimaced at the taste, and found himself almost smiling through the ache in his chest. The next morning he began writing. Not reports or protocols, but an actual account of the previous months. What it had been like to guard someone who refused to let him hide, who taught him that connection wasn't weakness, who made him remember that being human was part of the job, not a liability to overcome. 6 months later, when the liaison protocol cautiously restarted the cultural exchange with new ambassadors and new guards, David's account became required reading. Not because it was a tactical manual, but because it was honest about the impossible balance between protecting and caring, between duty and humanity. He never stopped listening for her heartbeat in quiet moments, never stopped carrying that rhythm she'd taught him. And when he took his next assignment, guarding a young diplomat from another world, he approached it differently. Still vigilant, still professional, but no longer afraid of the connection that made the protection matter. Some lessons he'd learned could only be taught by someone willing to see past your armor. And some goodbyes, though they hurt impossibly, were worth it for what they taught you about being alive.